Some people call him a savior. Others call him a monster. He was a Nobel laureate who figured out how to feed billions, and at the same time, a war criminal who pioneered mass death. So today, we're going to dig into the deeply unsettling paradox that is Fritz Haber, a story of staggering creation and truly unimaginable destruction.
And this, right here, cuts right to the heart of it. On one hand, you've got this incredible benefactor, the man celebrated for literally pulling bread from the air. And on the other, the killer, the man who unleashed death from that exact same hair. So how can one guy be both of these things at the same time? That's the huge question we're going to try and unpack here.
All right, so let's start with the good side of the story. The achievement that earned him a Nobel Prize and completely changed the course of human history. We're talking about the invention that literally pulled bread from thin air, and it still feeds billions of us even today. So, back in the early 1900s, humanity was heading for a major crisis. Our ability to grow food was totally limited by the natural supply of nitrogen for fertilizer. Now, nitrogen is everywhere. It makes up about 80% of the air we breathe, but it's incredibly stable and it's really hard to capture. Fritz Haber is the one who solved this massive puzzle. His Haber-Bosch process found a way to fix that nitrogen from the atmosphere, turning it into ammonia on an industrial scale. And that was the magic ingredient for synthetic fertilizer.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the scale of his impact. That number, 50%. Think about it like this. For half the people on this entire planet, the very nitrogen atoms that make up their bodies, they passed through a factory using his process. That is just a staggering legacy.
And yeah, this really shows you what happened next. Before Haber, the global population was basically stuck, limited by what the land could naturally grow. But after his process got going in 1913, boom, that limit was just shattered. You can draw a direct line from his invention to the insane population boom of the last 100 years.
So for this incredible breakthrough, the world's highest scientific body gave him its most prestigious award. In 1918, he was a hero to all of humanity. But this is where the story takes a really, really dark turn. In this quote, this really gets to the core of his belief system. This was the principle that guided the entire second half of his career. You see, Haber was a deeply passionate German nationalist. And when World War I kicked off, he saw it as his absolute patriotic duty to turn that brilliant mind of his from creating life to taking it. So, that same genius that was once used to create life, well, now it was being repurposed to end it. He became the architect of a whole new kind of horror on the battlefield.
Now, the key thing to understand here is that Haber wasn't just some cog in the machine. No, he was the guy designing the machine. He gets promoted to captain, he's made head of the chemistry section, and he's the one passionately arguing, we need to use poison gas. He even recruited other top scientists to his cause and was right there on the front lines personally supervising the first massive chlorine gas attack in 1915. And the results? Well, they were brutally effective. At the Second Battle of Ypres, this heavier-than-air chlorine gas just silently drifted into the Allied trenches. The result? Over 67,000 casualties in its very first use. His weapon had broken the stalemate of trench warfare, just like he promised it would.
So how did he sleep at night? How did he justify this? Well, this quote right here, it reveals his chilling logic. To Haber, death was just death. He basically argued that gas wasn't any more inhumane than getting blown up by an artillery shell or shot with a bullet. He even suggested it was a better weapon because it caused fewer mutilations. It was just this cold, scientific rationalization for a new, terrifying kind of warfare. The consequences of his work weren't just felt on the battlefield. They hit incredibly close to home. Just 10 days after that first successful attack, his wife Claire Amerwar, who was a brilliant chemist herself and a pacifist, she took his army pistol and killed herself in their garden. It was this profound, tragic protest against his work. And Haber's reaction? He left for the Eastern Front the very next day to oversee another gas attack. By the end of that year, he'd been promoted.
After the war, you might think the story is over. But the biggest tragedy for Haber, the patriot, that was still to come. And it was delivered by the very country he had so fervently and so brutally served.
And this is the ultimate bitter irony of his life. You see, Haber was born into a Jewish family, but he'd converted to Christianity and saw himself as 100% German. He thought his wartime service had proven his patriotism beyond any doubt. But then, in 1933, the Nazis came to power, and None of that mattered. He was ordered to fire the Jewish scientists at his own institute. And in one final act of principle, he refused. He resigned and fled Germany forever.
His exile was just lonely. On one side, the nation he loved had thrown him out because of his Jewish heritage, and on the other, many in the scientific world, people like the famous physicist Ernest Rutherford, they just couldn't forgive him for what he did during the war. They wouldn't even shake his hand. He was a man without a country, and really without a community.
He died of heart failure less than a year after he fled Germany. And this is his final resting place in Basel, Switzerland. In a strange and somber twist, in death, he was reunited with his wife Clara, whose remains removed from Berlin to be buried beside him. A truly somber end for a man of such intense, profound contradictions.
You know, maybe his friend Albert Einstein put it best. He said, Haber's life was the tragedy of the German Jew, the tragedy of unrequited love. Love for a nation that, in the end, betrayed him, despite everything he did for it, both the good and the absolutely terrible.
So that leaves us with this final, really difficult question. Fritz Haber's story just forces you to confront this tangled mess of scientific genius, morality, and loyalty. His legacy is one of both boundless creation and horrific destruction. So can we, or maybe more importantly, should we, ever truly separate the work from the person behind it?